My name is Dorothy Williams, and I'm 66 years old. What I'm about to tell you changed my life forever. The funeral for my husband Frank was the quietest day of my existence. There, beside his grave, I received a message from an unknown number that sent a chill through me. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket." I replied, my hands trembling. "Who are you?" The response took my breath away. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." That moment tore my soul in two. My world crumbled when I saw Michael and David, my own sons, standing by the casket with strangely calm expressions. Something was wrong. Their tears seemed forced, their hugs as cold as ice. For 42 years, Frank had been my partner, my refuge, my reason for living. I met him when I was 24 in the small town of Pine Valley, Wisconsin. We grew up on the same dusty back roads, sharing modest dreams. I cleaned houses to support my sick mother, while Frank repaired bicycles in a small shop he inherited from his father. We were poor, but we were happy. We had something money couldn't buy: real love. I remember the first time he spoke to me. It was a Tuesday morning. I was walking toward the market in my faded green dress and worn-out shoes. He stepped out of his shop with grease-stained hands and smiled at me with a shyness that made me fall in love with him instantly. "Good morning, Dorothy," he said in a soft voice. "Need me to check out your bike?" I didn't own a bike, but I came up with an excuse just to talk to him. That conversation turned into dates under the big old oak tree in Memorial Park, then into promises of eternal love, and finally into a simple wedding full of hope. The first few years were hard. We lived in a 2-bedroom house with a tin roof. When it rained, we'd set out pots all over the house to catch the leaks, but we were happy. Frank worked from sunup to sundown in his shop, and I sewed clothes for the women in town. When Michael was born, I thought my heart would burst with happiness. He was a beautiful baby with his father's big eyes and my smile. 2 years later, David arrived just as perfect. I raised them with all the love in the world, sacrificing my own needs for theirs. Frank was a wonderful father. He'd take them fishing in Lake Superior on Sundays, teach them to fix things with their hands, and tell them stories before bed. I fed them, dressed them, and comforted them when they cried. We were a close family, or so I believed. As they grew up, things started to change. Michael, the oldest, was always ambitious. From a young age, he'd ask why we lived so modestly, why we didn't have a car like other families. David followed his lead in everything, as he always had. When Michael turned 18, Frank offered him a job at the shop, but he rejected it with contempt. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad. I'm going to be someone important." Those words hurt Frank deeply, though he never said it to me. I'd see him sitting on the porch at night, staring at the stars with a look of sadness. His son had rejected not only his work, but his entire way of life. The years passed, and to my surprise, Michael managed to make a name for himself in the business world. He got a job at a real estate company in Milwaukee. David followed soon after. They both started making money, far more than Frank and I had ever seen. At first, I was so proud. My sons had achieved what we never could, escaping poverty and building a better life. But little by little, that joy turned into sadness. Visits became less frequent, and phone calls grew shorter. When they did come, they arrived in expensive cars, dressed in fancy suits, talking about investments and properties. They'd look at us with a strange mix of pity and shame. "Mom," Michael said to me during one of their sporadic visits, "you and Dad should move somewhere better. This house is falling apart." He was right, but that house held all our memories. It was where we'd raised our sons, where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we'd grown old together. It wasn't fancy, but it was our home. Frank, always wise, would tell me, "Dorothy, money has changed our boys. We aren't enough for them anymore." I resisted believing it. I kept justifying their absences, their brief calls, their broken promises. I tell myself they're busy building their lives. Someday they'll be the loving boys we raised again. But in my heart, I knew Frank was right. We had lost our sons long before I lost my husband. I just didn't know to what extent we had become strangers to them. The most drastic change came when Michael married Rebecca Sterling, a woman from the city who never hid her disdain for our simple lifestyle. The first time he brought him home, she arrived in high heels that sunk into the dirt of our porch and an elegant red dress that looked more expensive than everything I had ever owned. "Nice to meet you," she said with a forced smile, barely extending the tips of her fingers to greet me. Her eyes scanned our humble home with an expression I couldn't decipher, but that made me feel small. During dinner, Rebecca barely touched the food I had prepared with so much love. She moved the meatloaf around on her plate and cut tiny pieces of chicken, but she ate almost nothing. Michael seemed nervous, constantly apologizing for things he had never been ashamed of before. "Mom," Michael said to me during one of their sporadic visits, "we should take them out to a restaurant next time." He said it to Rebecca, thinking I couldn't hear, but I heard him. Every word pierced my heart like a knife. David, for his part, remained single, but adopted the same distant attitude as his brother. His visits were limited to special occasions, and even then, he always seemed to be in a hurry to leave. He was constantly on his phone, closing deals, even during our conversations. "Mom, I have to go," he'd always say before it was time. "I have an important meeting early tomorrow." Family Sundays became a distant memory. Christmases grew cold and formal. My sons would bring expensive gifts we didn't need. They'd stay for 2 or 3 hours and then leave with evident relief. Frank and I grew old alone, comforting each other. He continued to work in his shop, though his hands no longer had the same strength. I continued with my sewing, but my eyes weren't the same. We made do with our small income, proud not to ask for anything from our successful sons. "Do you know what the saddest part is, Dorothy?" Frank said to me one night as we drank coffee on the porch. "It's not that they have money, it's that the money has made them believe we aren't important anymore." He was right, as always. My sons hadn't just changed financially, they had changed in their hearts. We were no longer their beloved parents. We were an uncomfortable reminder of a past they wanted to forget. Things got worse when Michael bought a $200,000 house in an exclusive neighborhood in Madison. David did the same soon after, investing in a luxury condo in downtown Milwaukee that cost $150,000. Suddenly, our sons were owners of fortunes we couldn't even imagine. "You should sell this house and move into a retirement community," Rebecca suggested during one of her rare visits. "There are some very nice places for people your age. You'd be more comfortable." The words hit me like a slap. A retirement community. After 40 years of building our home, after raising these sons with so much love, they wanted to send us to a home. "We don't need a home," Frank replied, with the dignity that always characterized him. "We're fine here, in our house." But I saw the expression on Michael and David's faces. They supported Rebecca's idea. To them, we were a burden, a problem to be solved in the most convenient way. It was then that the more direct suggestions began. Michael arrived one day with papers in his hand, documents he had prepared without consulting us. "Mom, Dad," he said with that fake smile he had perfected, "I've been thinking about your future. This house is worth at most $50,000. If you sell it, I can add some money so you can move somewhere better." To us, there was no place better than the home where we had been happy for decades. But Michael didn't understand that. For him, everything came down to numbers, to monetary value. "Besides," he continued, "I think Dad should retire from the shop. He's already 70 years old. It's time to rest." Frank looked at him with infinite sadness. "Son, working isn't a burden for me. It's what keeps me alive, what gives meaning to my days." "But you could get hurt," David insisted, backing up his brother as he always did. "At your age, an accident would be very dangerous." Their words sounded caring, but I sensed something more behind them, an impatience, an urgency I couldn't fully grasp. The following months were tense. My sons increased the pressure for us to sell the house. They brought real estate agents without telling us. They had it appraised without our permission. They even started talking about what would be best for everyone. "Look," Michael said to us during a particularly uncomfortable dinner, "Rebecca and I have decided to have kids soon. We'll need help with the expenses. If you sell the house and move to a smaller place, that money could be an early inheritance." An early inheritance? He was asking for our inheritance while we were still alive. The audacity of the request left me speechless. Frank remained calm, but I saw his jaw tense. "Son, when your mother and I die, everything we have will be yours. But while we're alive, our decisions are our own." "Don't be stubborn," David cut in with a harshness I had never seen from him before. "You're old now. You can't keep living in the past." That night, after they left, Frank and I stayed up talking until dawn. For the first time in our marriage, we discussed the possibility that our sons were not the people we thought we had raised. "Something's wrong, Dorothy," my husband said to me with a look of worry I had never seen in his eyes. "This isn't just ambition or impatience. There's something darker behind all this pressure." I had no idea how profoundly correct his words were. I couldn't imagine that my own sons were planning something that would change our lives forever. I didn't know that the tragedy that was coming wouldn't be an accident of fate, but a conspiracy carefully orchestrated by the two people I trusted most in the world. The last normal conversation I had with Michael was 3 weeks before Frank's death. He came alone, without Rebecca, and looked more serious than usual. "Mom," he said, sitting at the kitchen table where he had eaten breakfast so many times as a boy, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, David and I will always take care of you." His words soothed me at the time, but now, remembering them beside Frank's grave, they send a shiver down my spine. Why did he say, "no matter what happens"? What did he know that I didn't? The accident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning. Frank had left early for the shop, as he had done every day for more than 40 years. I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite lunch, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, when the phone rang with an urgency that sent a chill through me. "Mrs. Williams, I'm calling from St. Mary's Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately." The words blurred in my mind like ink in water. The world stopped. My legs turned to jelly, and I had to grab the door frame to keep from falling. "What happened? Is he okay? Is he alive?" "Ma'am, please come as soon as possible." The trip to the hospital was a hazy nightmare. My neighbor, Helen, had to drive me because I was shaking so much I couldn't even hold the keys. The whole way there, my mind refused to process what was happening. Frank was careful, meticulous in his work. How could this have happened? When we got to the hospital, Michael and David were already there. That surprised me because no one had notified them yet. At least, not me. But in my desperation, I didn't pay attention to that detail. "Mom," Michael said, hugging me with a force that seemed genuine, "Dad is in bad shape. The doctors say one of the machines at the shop exploded. He has severe burns and a traumatic brain injury." David's eyes were red, but something in his expression felt off. He seemed more nervous than sad, like someone waiting for important news rather than someone suffering for his father. "Can we see him?" I asked, desperate. "Only immediate family, one at a time and for 5 minutes max," the nurse explained. When I entered that ICU room, my heart sank. Frank was hooked up to a dozen machines, with bandages covering most of his face and arms. I barely recognized him. His breathing was labored, artificial, kept going by machines that beeped constantly. I walked up to his bed and took his hand, the only part of his body that seemed intact. "Frank, my love, I'm here. Everything is going to be all right. You're going to recover just like you always do." For a moment, I felt a slight squeeze in my hand. His eyes moved behind his closed lids. He was fighting. My warrior was fighting to get back to me. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I practically lived at the hospital, sleeping in the uncomfortable chairs in the waiting room. Michael and David took turns accompanying me, but they always seemed more interested in talking to the doctors than in comforting their father. I overheard fragmented conversations that I couldn't fully understand at the time. David asked about medical insurance, about the cost of treatment. Michael was on the phone talking about life insurance policies and beneficiaries. "Mom, we reviewed Dad's insurance. He has a life insurance policy for $50,000. There's also a workers' comp policy that could cover up to $75,000 more." Why was he talking to me about money when Frank was still fighting for his life? Why was he worried about insurance instead of his father's recovery? "I don't care about the money," I responded harshly. "I just want your dad to get better." "Of course, Mom," he said, but I saw something in his eyes that I didn't like. A coldness, a calculator working while his father lay dying. That night, alone in the hospital room, I took Frank's hand and spoke to him as if he could hear me. "My love, I don't know what to do. The doctors say there's no hope, but I can't let you go. I can't imagine my life without you." It was then that something happened that still gives me goosebumps. His fingers moved slightly, squeezing mine with a force that was almost imperceptible. His lips moved as if he were trying to say something, but no sound came out. I called for the nurses, desperate. "He's reacting. He's trying to talk." But by the time they arrived, Frank had returned to his previous state. The nurse checked the monitors and shook her head. "Sometimes there are involuntary muscle spasms, ma'am. It doesn't mean he's conscious." But I knew what I had felt. Frank had tried to communicate with me. He had fought to tell me something important. 2 days later, in the early hours of Friday morning, the machine alarms went off. Lights flashed. Nurses rushed to Frank's room. I was dozing in the hallway when the noise woke me up. "No! No, no, no!" I screamed, running towards the room. The doctors worked for 40 minutes trying to resuscitate him, but it was useless. At 4:37 in the morning, Frank was officially declared dead. The pain I felt in that moment was physical, as if my heart had been ripped from my chest. I collapsed by his bed, hugging his still warm body, refusing to accept that he was gone forever. Michael and David arrived at the hospital an hour after their father's death. They seemed prepared, as if they had been expecting the call. They brought papers, documents, and phone numbers for funeral homes. "We already talked to the Riverside Funeral Home," Michael said to me while I was still crying inconsolably. "They can pick up the body this morning." "We also contacted the insurance. The claim process is already underway." How could they be so efficient, so organized, so cold just an hour after losing their father? Something was wrong, but my grief was so intense that I couldn't think clearly. The funeral was scheduled for the following Monday. Michael took care of all the arrangements without really consulting me. He chose the simplest casket, the shortest service, as if he wanted to get it all over with as quickly as possible. "It's what Dad would have wanted," he said, when I complained about not being included in the decisions. "Something simple, without a fuss." But Frank deserved better than this indecent rush to bury him and forget him. The day of the funeral arrived, cloudy and cold, as if the sky itself was crying for Frank. I wore my only black dress, the same one I had worn for my mother's funeral years ago. My hands were shaking so much that Helen had to help me button the small buttons on the back. "Be strong, Dorothy," my dear friend whispered as she carefully combed my hair. "Frank would want to see you strong." But I didn't feel strong. I felt empty, like a shell without a soul. 42 years of marriage can't be buried so easily. Every object in the house reminded me of him. His coffee mug on the table, his tools on the porch, his pillow that still held his scent. When we got to the cemetery, I was surprised by how few people had attended. I expected to see more of Frank's coworkers from the shop, more neighbors, more acquaintances, but it was only Michael, David, Rebecca, Helen, me, and the pastor. For a man who lived 70 years in the same town, who had helped so many people, the funeral seemed strangely empty. "Where are the guys from the shop?" I asked Michael. We didn't want to bother anyone. Dad was a private person. He would have preferred something intimate. But that wasn't true. Frank loved his community. He cared about his neighbors. He would have wanted them to come say goodbye. Why had Michael decided to make everything so secretive, so rushed? During the service, I watched my sons with a strange emotional detachment. Michael had a solemn expression appropriate for the occasion, but his eyes constantly darted toward his watch. David seemed restless, as if he had more important things to do. Rebecca discreetly checked her phone behind her black veil. This was how they were saying goodbye to their father, with impatience and distractions. The pastor spoke about eternal life, about well-deserved rest, about reuniting with God. His words felt hollow in my shattered heart. I didn't want Frank to rest in peace. I wanted him to come home with me, for us to keep growing old together, for us to keep drinking coffee on the porch every evening. When it was time to throw dirt on the casket, my legs refused to hold me up. Helen had to support me as I sobbed uncontrollably. The sound of the dirt hitting the wood was final, conclusive, hopeless. It was at that exact moment, standing by my husband's grave, that my phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket." My heart stopped. The letters danced in front of my eyes as if I were hallucinating. I was losing my mind from the grief. With trembling hands, I replied, "Who are you?" The answer came immediately. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." The phone fell from my hands as if it were burning. Helen bent down to pick it up, but I stopped her abruptly. I couldn't let anyone else see those messages, not until I understood what was happening. "Are you okay, Mom?" Michael asked, approaching with a worried expression. I stared at him, trying to find some clue on his face. His eyes seemed sincere, but now every gesture, every word, every expression felt suspicious. "I'm fine," I lied, putting the phone in my purse. "I just need to go home." On the way back, I couldn't get those messages out of my head. Was it possible that someone was playing a cruel joke at the worst moment of my life? Or was there really a possibility that Frank was alive? But if he was alive, who had we buried? And if he wasn't alive, who knew enough details about our lives to write something so specific about our sons? That night, alone in my house, which now felt like a tomb, I reviewed every detail of the last few days. Frank's accident had been strange from the beginning. According to Michael, a machine had exploded in the shop, but Frank knew every screw and wire in that place. He was meticulous about maintenance, obsessive about safety. Plus, how did my sons get to the hospital so quickly if no one had notified them? The hospital had called me first. I was the emergency contact. How did they know about the accident before I did? And then there was the money. From day one, Michael and David had talked about insurance policies and beneficiaries as if they had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it. I decided to check Frank's papers. In his old wooden desk, he kept all his important documents in a metal box. Insurance policies, the deed to the house, shop documents, everything was there. I found the $50,000 life insurance policy that Michael had mentioned, but there was something I didn't remember. The policy had been updated just 6 months earlier, increasing the coverage from $25,000 to $50,000. Why had Frank increased his life insurance? He had never mentioned that change to me, and more importantly, who had suggested he do it? I kept looking and found something even more disturbing, a workers' comp policy that I didn't know about, purchased just 2 months before his death. $75,000 in case of accidental death on the job, $125,000 in total. A fortune for a family like ours, but also a fortune tempting enough for someone without scruples. My phone vibrated again. Another message from the same unknown number. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. This time, I didn't hesitate. This person, whoever they were, knew too much to be a prankster. They knew about the insurance. They knew about my sons. They knew details that only someone very close to us could know. The next day, I went to the First National Bank of Pine Valley, where Frank and I had kept our account for 30 years. Mrs. Johnson, the manager who had known us forever, greeted me with sincere condolences. "Mrs. Williams, I'm so sorry about Frank. He was a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. I came to check our accounts. I need to understand our financial situation." She showed me the bank statements from the last 6 months. What I saw froze me. Over the past 3 months, large withdrawals had been made from our savings account. $2,000 in January, $3,000 in February, and $4,000 in March. Money that I didn't know had been moved. "Who authorized those withdrawals?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Your husband came in person. He said he needed the money for repairs at the shop. But I kept the household accounts. I knew exactly how much money we had and what we spent. Frank had never mentioned expensive repairs at the shop, and we definitely never talked about withdrawing thousands of dollars from our savings account." "Do you have the signatures for those withdrawals?" I asked. She showed me the receipts. Indeed, it looked like Frank's signature, but something about the handwriting seemed off. It was too shaky, too uncertain for his usually firm, clear script. "Mrs. Johnson," I asked with my heart pounding, "did he come alone to make these withdrawals, or was someone with him?" She thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, I think he came in with one of your sons once or twice. Michael, I think. He said he was helping his dad with the paperwork because Frank had trouble reading documents without his glasses." Michael. My son had been involved in money withdrawals I didn't know about, using his father's tired eyes as an excuse. But Frank saw perfectly well with his glasses, which he never took off during the day. That afternoon, as I looked over the bank receipts again and again, I received another message. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Frank he needed more protection. For you. It was a trap. I could no longer deny the evidence piling up in front of me. The mysteriously increased insurance policies, the unauthorized money withdrawals, Michael's presence in transactions I knew nothing about, his coldness during his father's agony. But the question that terrified me was if they had really planned Frank's death, how they had done it, and who was sending me these messages. How did this person know so much about what had happened? The next few days became a nightmare of doubt and suspicion. Every one of Michael's smiles, every one of David's hugs, every word of condolence felt like a mask hiding something sinister. But I needed more proof before I could accept a truth as horrible as the one taking shape in my mind. My phone kept receiving messages from the mysterious number. Tomorrow, go to the police station, ask for the report on Frank's accident. There are contradictions you need to know. The next day, I went to the local police station. Sheriff O'Connor, who had known Frank for years, greeted me kindly. "The report on your husband's accident," he asked with a confused expression. "What accident, Mrs. Williams?" "From his shop, when the machine exploded." The sheriff checked his files and shook his head. "We don't have any report of an explosion at Frank's shop here. In fact, we don't have any report of a work accident involving your husband." I felt the world sway under my feet. But my son said it was an accident at the shop. That's why he was in the hospital." "Mrs. Williams, your husband arrived at the hospital on Tuesday morning, but not from a work accident. According to the medical report I have here, he arrived unconscious with symptoms of poisoning. The doctors found traces of methanol in his blood, a quantity sufficient to cause blindness, brain damage, and eventually death. The hospital should have informed you of this."
Poisoning. It hadn't been an explosion. It hadn't been a work accident. Someone had deliberately poisoned my husband. "Why didn't anyone tell me this?" I asked, my voice breaking. The immediate family who signed the hospital papers requested that the information be kept confidential to avoid unnecessary speculation. They said you were too emotionally fragile to handle the technical details. The immediate family? Michael and David had hidden the true cause of Frank's condition, invented the story of the explosion, and manipulated everyone, including me, to cover up a murder? "Mrs. Williams," the sheriff continued, "if you suspect foul play in the circumstances of your husband's death, we could open a formal investigation." I had more than suspicions. I was certain that my own sons had murdered their father for money. That afternoon, David came home with a bouquet of flowers and the same fake smile as Michael. "How are you, Mom? You look tired." "I'm fine," I lied, observing his every gesture from a new perspective. "I'm just thinking about the future." "That's good. Michael and I have been talking. We think you should sell the house soon while it's fresh on the real estate market." "Why the rush?" "Well, old houses lose value quickly, and you need liquidity, funeral expenses, pending medical bills." More lies. The funeral had been cheap, almost insultingly so, and there were no pending medical bills because the hospital insurance had covered them. "David," I said, looking him directly in the eyes, "you knew your dad didn't die from a work accident." For a fraction of a second, I saw panic in his expression, but he recovered quickly. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "I went to the police station. There's no report of an explosion at your dad's shop." This time, the panic was more evident. "Mom, you shouldn't be doing things like that. They'll confuse you. The grief is getting to you." "The grief is getting to me, or you've been lying to me." He got up abruptly, spilling the coffee I had poured for him. "I think you need to rest. We'll talk when you're calmer." He left quickly, but not before making a phone call from the porch. Although I couldn't hear the words, the tone was urgent, worried. That night, I received the most revealing message yet. "They're coming together tomorrow. They're going to try to convince you that you're crazy, that grief is making you imagine things. Don't believe them, and don't take anything they offer you to eat or drink.
The mysterious message's prediction came true exactly as it had warned. The next day, Michael and David arrived together at my house, accompanied by Rebecca. They had expressions of exaggerated concern and a bag of pastries from the downtown bakery. "Mom, we're so worried about you," Michael began in a sugary voice. "The neighbors have told us you've been acting strange. Helen says you've been talking to yourself, that you aren't eating well." Helen never said that. It was just another lie in their growing collection. "Rebecca brought your favorite pastries," David added, pointing to the bag, "and we made special coffee from that brand you like so much." I remembered the message's words, "Don't take anything they offer you to eat or drink." It was possible that they were planning to poison me too, just as they had Frank. "Thank you, but I already had breakfast," I said, keeping my distance. "But Mom, you need to eat properly. You've lost a lot of weight since Frank died." "I'm fine," I repeated firmly. Michael exchanged a significant look with David, the same look they had shared at the hospital when the doctor gave us Frank's prognosis. "Mom," Michael said, sitting closer to me, "we want to talk to you about something important. David and I have been consulting with some doctors about your recent behavior." "My behavior?" "Yes, the strange questions you've been asking, the visits to the police station, that obsession with irrelevant details about Dad. It's normal after such a great loss, but it can be dangerous if it's not treated." David nodded gravely. "We spoke to Dr. Sterling. He says it's common for older people to develop paranoia after losing a partner, especially women your age." Paranoia? They were accusing me of being crazy for uncovering their lies. "I am not paranoid," I said, with all the firmness I could muster. "I'm just asking questions I should have asked from the beginning." "What questions?" Michael challenged me. "Like why there's no police report for your dad's supposed accident. Like why the shop is perfectly clean if there was an explosion. Like why you withdrew $9,000 from our account without telling me anything." The silence that followed was deafening. The three of them exchanged looks of thinly disguised panic. "Mom," David said, finally, "those things have simple explanations. Dad withdrew that money for repairs he wanted to do in secret as a surprise for you." "What surprise?" "He wanted to remodel the house," Michael lied. "He had hired some workers to fix the roof and paint the walls. He wanted it to be a surprise for your birthday." If that were true, where were the workers? Where were the materials? Why didn't no one in town know about this supposed remodeling? "And about the police report," Michael continued, "not all work accidents require a report, especially when they happen on private property." More lies. Sheriff O'Connor had been very clear. Any work accident with serious injuries requires an official report. "Mom," Rebecca intervened with a sweet but condescending voice, "we just want to take care of you. That's why we thought it would be best if you moved to a place with specialized medical attention." "A home," Michael corrected, "a home specialized care home for people who are going through complicated grief. They have psychologists, nurses, activities to keep you busy." "And in the meantime," David added, "we can take care of selling the house, managing the insurance money, all those complicated things you shouldn't have to handle in your current state." There it was, the complete plan. Declare me mentally incompetent, put me in a home, and take control of all my money. "And if I refuse?" I asked them. "Why would you refuse?" Michael asked, with a smile that sent a chill through me. "Because this is my house. This is where I built my life with Frank. This is where I raised you." "Mom," David said with an exaggerated sigh, "you can't live in the past forever. Dad's gone. You have to accept it and move on." "I have accepted it, but that doesn't mean I'm going to give away my life and my money." The mask of concern began to crack on my sons' faces. Michael got up abruptly. "All right, if you won't listen to reason, we'll have to take more drastic measures." "What does that mean?" It means we can start a legal process to have you declared mentally incompetent. We have witnesses to your erratic behavior. We have testimony from doctors who confirm you're suffering from senile paranoia. Doctors? What doctors? I hadn't spoken to any doctors about my mental state. Dr. Sterling already signed a preliminary report. He says that based on our descriptions of your behavior, it's likely you need specialized care. A doctor who had never examined me signed a report about my mental state based only on what my sons had told me? How much did they cost to buy that false evaluation? So, you can cooperate voluntarily or we can do it legally, but either way, you're going to get the help you need. It was a direct threat. If I didn't hand over my money voluntarily, they would use the legal system to steal it from me. I need time to think about it, I told them, trying to buy time. Of course, Rebecca said with her false sweetness, but not too much time. For your own good. After they left, I sat in my kitchen, trembling with rage and fear. My own sons, the blood of my blood, had not only murdered their father, but now they were planning to steal everything I had left. That night, my phone vibrated with a message longer than the others. Dorothy, this is Detective Robert Thompson, a private investigator. Frank hired me 3 weeks before he died because he was suspicious of Michael and David. They poisoned him with methanol mixed in his breakfast coffee. I have audio evidence of their conversations planning everything. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., go to Murphy's Diner on Main Street. Sit at the back booth. I'll be there. I knew I didn't have much time. Michael and David had shown their hand. If I didn't act fast, I'd end up locked in a home while they spent the money that had cost Frank his life. The war had begun, and even if I was a 66-year-old woman against 2 ruthless men, I had something they didn't: the truth. And the truth, sooner or later, always finds a way to come out. That night, for the first time since Frank's death, I smiled because I knew my husband had not died in vain. His caution, his instinct, his decision to hire a private investigator was going to allow me to get justice for my husband's death. Michael and David had seriously underestimated their mother. They were about to discover that a woman fighting for the memory of her murdered husband is a force more powerful than all their greed combined. The meeting. The next day arrived filled with nervousness and anticipation. I dressed carefully, choosing my most serious purple dress, the one I wore for important occasions. If I was going to meet the man who could give me the answers I needed, I wanted to be prepared for any revelation. At 2:30 p.m., I walked toward Murphy's Diner with determined but cautious steps. Every shadow looked suspicious. Every person on the street could be a spy sent by my sons. The paranoia they had accused me of having was starting to feel justified. The diner was moderately full. I went straight to the back booth as I had been instructed. I ordered a chamomile tea and waited, my hands trembling slightly on the worn Formica table. Exactly at 3 o'clock, a man in his 50s approached my table. He was tall and gray-haired, with intelligent eyes and a serious but kind expression. He was carrying a brown folder under his arm. "Mrs. Williams?" he asked in a low voice. I nodded, not yet trusting my voice. "I'm Detective Robert Thompson. I'm so sorry for your loss. Frank was a good man." He sat down across from me and placed the folder on the table. "Before I show you what I have, I need you to know that what you're about to hear and see is going to be very painful. Are you ready?" "I've been getting ready since I received your first message," I replied with a firmness I didn't know I had. Thompson opened the folder and took out a small voice recorder. "Frank came to see me a month ago. He was worried about his son's behavior. He hired me to investigate them discreetly." He pressed the play button. Frank's voice, so familiar and dear, filled the small space between us. "Thompson, I need you to know that if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Michael and David have been pressuring me to increase my life insurance. Yesterday, Michael brought me papers he said were to better protect Dorothy, but when I read them, I realized there were also clauses that directly benefited them." My heart sped up. Hearing Frank's voice was like having him back for a few minutes, but his words confirmed my worst suspicions. The recording continued. "David has been asking strange questions about my daily routine, what I eat for breakfast, what time I leave the house, if Dorothy comes to the shop with me. He says it's out of concern, but something about the way he asks worries me." Thompson paused the recording. "This conversation was 3 weeks before his death, but I have something more recent." He played another recording, this time with Michael's voice in the background talking on the phone. "No, we can't wait any longer. The old man is starting to get suspicious. Yesterday he asked me why I was so interested in his insurance. Yes, I already have the methanol. It works perfectly because the symptoms look like a heart attack or a stroke. No, Mom won't be a problem. After Dad dies, she'll be so devastated that we can do whatever we want with her." Tears began to roll down my cheeks. It was the voice of my son, my own son, coldly planning his father's murder. "There's more," Thompson said softly. "This recording is from the day before Frank's death." A new recording began, this time with David's voice in the background talking to someone. "Everything's ready. Tomorrow, Michael is going to put the methanol in Dad's coffee. We told him it was a special vitamin supplement a doctor recommended. The idiot is going to drink it without suspecting a thing. The symptoms will start with dizziness and confusion, then loss of sight, convulsions, coma. The doctors will think it's a stroke or a heart attack. By the time they realize it's poisoning, it'll be too late." My world completely collapsed. Not only had they planned Frank's murder, but they were executing it with a coldness that terrified me. How was it possible that my sons, the babies I had nursed, the boys I had comforted through their nightmares, were capable of something so monstrous? "How did you get these recordings?" I asked through my sobs. "Frank had asked me to put listening devices in your house. He was afraid, but he didn't know exactly of what. We placed them on the home phone and in some other strategic spots." He took out a series of photographs from the folder. "And I also have this, Michael buying methanol at Henderson's hardware store, 30 miles from town. He paid with cash and used a fake name, but I have it on video." The photographs clearly showed Michael leaving a hardware store with a small bottle in his hands. The date on the photos was 5 days before Frank's death. "And this," he continued, showing me more documents, "these are Michael and David's financial records from the last 6 months. They've been spending a lot more money than their incomes justify. Michael owes $87,000 to a lender in Milwaukee. David has gambling debts for $52,000. They were desperate." It all started to make sense. It wasn't just greed that had motivated Frank's murder. It was financial desperation. My sons were ruined and saw their father as a source of easy, fast money. "Why didn't you go to the police immediately after Frank's death?" I asked him through my sobs. "Because Michael and David are very smart. They bribed the doctor who attended to Frank at the hospital to change the official diagnosis. Instead of poisoning, the death certificate says heart failure due to complications from a work accident. Without that medical evidence, my recordings might not have been enough for a conviction." "But now we have all the evidence together," I said, feeling a mix of pain and determination. "Exactly. And there's one more thing you need to know." My blood ran cold. "What?" "Your sons were planning to kill you too. Thompson played a last recording, this time with Michael and David's voices together. "Once we have Dad's insurance money, we need to get rid of Mom too," Michael said. "We can't risk her getting suspicious or anyone else putting ideas in her head." "How?" David asked. "The same as with Dad, but this time we can make it look like a suicide from depression, a widow who can't live without her husband. Nobody would question it, and since we're her only heirs, everything would be ours. The house, the savings, the insurance money, almost $200,000 in total." The recording stopped. I was shaking uncontrollably. My sons had not only murdered their father, but they were planning to murder me as well, all for money. "Mrs. Williams," Thompson said gently, "I know this is devastating, but we have enough evidence to make them pay for what they did." "What do we do now?" I asked, wiping my tears. "First, we need to go to the police station with all this evidence. Sheriff O'Connell is an honest man. He's not involved in the corruption. Second, we need to act fast. Your sons are planning to have you declared mentally incompetent tomorrow. If they succeed, it will be much harder to proceed legally." "Tomorrow?" "Yes. I intercepted a phone conversation this morning. They're meeting with Judge Miller at 10 a.m. to start the mental incapacitating process." I got up from the table with a determination I hadn't felt in weeks. "Then we have to act tonight." "Exactly," Thompson confirmed. "But first, there's one more thing I want to show you." He took one last photograph from the folder. In it, Frank was leaving a medical clinic I didn't recognize. 3 days before he died, your husband went to get a full medical exam at a clinic in Madison. The results show that he was perfectly healthy. There were no signs of heart disease. His blood pressure was normal. Everything was perfect. This definitively proves that his death was caused by poisoning, not by natural health problems. That was the final piece of evidence we needed. Frank had been a healthy man, murdered by his own sons. "Thompson," I said, taking his hand, "thank you for keeping your promise to my husband. Now, let's get justice." Justice served. That very same night, Thompson and I went directly to the police station. Sheriff O'Connor was working the night shift that week, which was perfect for our purposes. When we arrived, it was 8 p.m. and the station was relatively quiet. "Sheriff O'Connor," I said in a firm voice, "I need to file a formal complaint for the murder of my husband, Frank." "Murder?" "Mrs. Williams, the death certificate says he died from heart complications after a work accident." "The death certificate is false," I replied, placing Thompson's folder on his desk. "My husband was deliberately poisoned with methanol by our own sons." For the next 2 hours, Thompson and I presented all the evidence. The audio recordings, the photographs of Michael buying methanol, the bank documents showing the unauthorized withdrawals, Frank's medical results proving his perfect health, and finally, the recorded conversations where my sons confessed to both their father's murder and their plans to kill me. Sheriff O'Connor listened to each recording with an increasingly serious expression. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head in disbelief. This is monstrous," he murmured. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Mrs. Williams? Once we arrest your sons, there's no turning back." "Sheriff," I replied with all the dignity I could muster, "those men murdered my husband in cold blood for money. They were planning to murder me, too. They are no longer my sons. They are criminals who must pay for their crimes." "We'll need the medical examiner to exhume Frank's body to confirm the presence of methanol," the sheriff explained. "Are you prepared for that?" "Do whatever is necessary," I replied without hesitation. Sheriff O'Connor immediately called the district attorney. Despite the late hour, the seriousness of the case led the DA to come to the station personally. After reviewing all the evidence, he immediately authorized arrest warrants for Michael and David. "We'll proceed at dawn," the DA explained to us. "We need to make sure we have all the evidence before they can destroy any additional proof." Thompson walked me home that night. "Are you sure you'll be okay alone?" he asked with concern. "I'll be fine. After everything I've discovered, I'm no longer afraid. I have justice on my side." I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed up sitting in the kitchen looking at the photographs of Frank we had on the walls. For the first time since his death, I didn't feel only pain. I felt a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction, knowing that justice for his murder was coming soon. At 6 a.m., my phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom, you need to come to David's house right away. Something terrible has happened." "What happened?" I asked, feigning concern. "It's better if I explain it in person. Please come quickly." I knew it was a trap. After hearing the recordings the night before, I knew they were planning to move up their plans to get rid of me. But I also knew the police were already on their way to arrest them. "I'm on my way," I lied. Instead of going to David's house, I stayed in my kitchen waiting. At 7:30 a.m., I saw from my window as several police cars headed toward my son's houses in different directions. My phone rang repeatedly for the next hour. First Michael, then David, both with increasingly desperate voices asking where I was, but I didn't answer any calls. At 9 a.m., Sheriff O'Connor knocked on my door. "Mrs. Williams, we've arrested Michael and David. They are in police custody, charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder." I felt my legs tremble, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from relief. How did they react? "Michael denied everything at first, but when we played the recordings for him, he collapsed. David tried to escape through the back window of his house. We had to chase him for 6 blocks. That afternoon, Rebecca came to see me. She arrived sobbing, pleading, completely different from the cold, calculating woman I had known. "Mrs. Williams, please, you have to drop the charges against Michael. He's not bad. He was just desperate because of his debts. This is my fault too. I pressured him a lot to find money." I looked at her without a trace of compassion. "Rebecca, your husband poisoned my husband. He was planning to murder me too. There is no explanation or justification for that." "But we're family," she screamed in desperation. "Think about what this is going to do to the family." "The family died the day you decided to kill Frank for money," I replied coldly. "Now, please leave my house." 3 days later, the exhumation of Frank's body was carried out. The lab results confirmed exactly what Thompson had discovered: lethal levels of methanol in his system, enough to cause all the symptoms he had experienced before his death. The case became a sensation throughout Pine Valley and the surrounding counties. No one could believe that 2 sons had murdered their own father for money. The local newspapers called it the cruelest crime of the decade. Over the following weeks, more details came to light during the investigation. Michael really owed $87,000 to illegal lenders who had started threatening him with violence. David had lost $52,000 in underground gambling dens and was also facing threats. They had seen Frank's life insurance money as their only salvation, but their greed had led them to increase the policies so dramatically that it had aroused their own father's suspicion. We also discovered that the doctor who had falsified the death certificate had received $10,000 in cash from Michael. He was also arrested for obstructing justice and falsifying official documents. Thompson explained all the details of the plan Frank had made with him. "Your husband was smarter than his sons believed. He knew something bad was coming, but he didn't know exactly what. He hired me not only to investigate Michael and David, but also to protect you if something happened to him." "Did he know they were going to kill him?" "Not exactly," Thompson said, "but he suspected his life was in danger. That's why we installed the recording devices. That's why we documented everything. He wanted to make sure that if something happened to him, the truth would come to light." My Frank, even in his final days, had been protecting me. He had anticipated our son's betrayal and had taken steps to ensure that justice would prevail.
The trial and its aftermath. The trial was scheduled to begin in 2 months. Both Michael and David faced charges of first-degree murder, which, in Wisconsin, carried a sentence of 25 years to life. The day of the trial arrived after 2 months of intense legal preparation. The courtroom was completely full. Reporters from several regional newspapers had come to cover what was already known as the case of the killer sons. The whole town was there. Neighbors, former co-workers of Frank, even people I barely knew, but who wanted to witness this historic moment of justice. I wore my best black dress, the same one I had worn for our wedding so many years ago, but which now represented mourning and dignity. Thompson accompanied me, sitting by my side throughout the entire process. His presence gave me the strength to face what would be the most difficult day of my life. Michael and David entered the courtroom in handcuffs, dressed in orange prison jumpsuits. Seeing my sons like that broke my heart one more time, but I no longer felt pity for them. I only felt a deep sadness for the moral death they had chosen long before they physically murdered their father. The prosecutor presented the case with devastating precision. One by one, the recordings were played for the court. The silence was absolute every time the voices of Michael and David were heard, coldly planning Frank's murder. When the prosecutor played the recording where they planned to kill me too, several people in the audience gasped in horror. One elderly woman got up and left the courtroom crying. I couldn't blame her. It was difficult to process such cruelty. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor said during his opening statement, "this is not an ordinary case of family greed. This is a case of cold and calculated premeditation where 2 men decided to murder the father who had raised them with love and sacrifice simply because they needed money to pay off their gambling debts and irresponsible loans." Michael and David's lawyers tried to present a defense based on desperate circumstances and external influences, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings didn't lie. The bank documents didn't lie. The forensic evidence of the methanol in Frank's body didn't lie. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with trembling legs but a clear mind. I had been waiting for this moment for months. "Mrs. Williams," the prosecutor asked me, "can you tell us what your relationship was like with your sons before your husband's murder?" "I thought I had a good relationship with them," I replied, looking directly at Michael and David. "I raised them with love. I sacrificed everything for their well-being. Their father worked from sun-up to sundown to give them the best we could. I never imagined that love and sacrifice would become the reason for his murder." "At any point, did you suspect they could harm your husband?" "No. That is the most painful part of all this. I trusted them completely. When they told me Frank had an accident at his shop, I believed them. When they organized the funeral so quickly, I thought they were being efficient in their grief. I never imagined they were covering up a murder." Michael lowered his head during my testimony. David looked at me defiantly, but I saw tears in his eyes. Too late for tears, too late for regret. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when the prosecutor decided to play the full recording of the conversation where they planned my own murder. Michael's voice filled the courtroom. "Once we have Dad's insurance money, we need to get rid of Mom too. We can't risk her getting suspicious." A murmur of horror swept through the audience. Several people turned to look at me with expressions of disbelief and compassion. "How did you feel when you heard this recording for the first time?" the prosecutor asked me. I realized that I had lost my 2 sons long before I lost my husband. I replied, my voice cracking but firm. "The babies I nursed, the children I comforted in their nightmares, had died and been replaced by 2 strangers capable of any cruelty for money. The defense tried to cross-examine me, suggesting that maybe I had misinterpreted my son's intentions, that maybe the grief had made me exaggerate the evidence. But the recordings didn't lie. The bank documents didn't lie. The forensic evidence of the methanol in Frank's body didn't lie." Thompson also testified, explaining in detail how Frank had hired him because he was afraid of his own sons. He described every step of the investigation, every piece of evidence collected, every recorded moment that revealed the truth. The medical examiner presented the results of the exhumation, confirming the lethal presence of methanol in Frank's body. He explained how this poison acts slowly, causing exactly the symptoms my husband had experienced before he died. After 3 days of devastating testimony, the closing arguments arrived. The prosecutor was crushing. Michael and David Williams are not victims of circumstances. They are predators who saw their own parents as financial obstacles that had to be eliminated. They planned, executed, and covered up Frank's murder and were planning to do the same to Dorothy. They don't deserve compassion. They deserve justice. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. I could hear the beating of my own heart as the judge read the verdict. In the case of the state of Wisconsin versus Michael Williams and David Williams on the charge of first-degree murder of Frank Williams, we find the defendants guilty. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and exclamations. Michael collapsed in his chair, finally comprehending the magnitude of what he had done. David remained rigid, staring straight ahead with no expression. On the charge of conspiracy to murder against Dorothy, we find the defendants guilty. The judge proceeded immediately to the sentencing. Michael Williams and David Williams, for the premeditated murder of your father and the conspiracy to murder your mother, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 30 years. When I heard those words, I felt a gigantic weight lift off my shoulders. Justice. Finally, there was justice for Frank. After the trial, many people came up to me to hug me and express their support. Helen cried with me not from sadness, but from relief. "Dorothy, Frank can rest in peace now," she whispered to me. That night, I returned to my house, which now felt different. It was no longer a place of pain and betrayal. It was my home again, the place where Frank and I had been happy for 42 years. Life after justice. Thompson came to visit me a week after the trial. "How do you feel?" he asked. "At peace," I answered honestly. "For the first time since Frank's death, I sleep soundly. I know he's resting because his death did not go unpunished." "And the money? The insurance? The savings?" "I donated the life insurance money to a foundation for victims of family crimes. That money was stained with blood. I could never have used it. My personal savings are enough to live modestly for the rest of my days." 6 months after the trial, I received a letter in the prison mail. It was from Michael. "Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I regret everything. The money, the deaths, the desperation, they blinded us. We lost all humanity. David and I destroyed the most loving family in the world for $125,000 that we didn't even get to enjoy. Tomorrow, I will take my own life in my cell. I can't live with what we did. Take care, Mom. Tell Dad we're sorry we were such bad sons." I didn't arrive to prevent his suicide. Michael was found hanging in his cell the next day. David, upon learning of his brother's death, suffered a complete nervous breakdown and was transferred to the prison psychiatric hospital. Today, 2 years after the trial, I live peacefully in my small house. I have converted Frank's shop into a garden where I grow flowers to take to his grave every Sunday. Thompson has become a close friend, visiting me regularly to make sure I'm okay. Sometimes the neighbors ask me if I miss my sons. The answer is complicated. I miss the children they were, but those children died long before Frank did. The men they became were not my sons. They were strangers who shared my blood, but not my heart. I have learned that true family is not defined by blood, but by love, loyalty, and mutual respect. Frank was my true family for 42 years. The friends who supported me during the trial are my family now. Justice did not bring Frank back, but it gave me peace. And on quiet nights, when I sit on the porch where we so often drank coffee together, I swear I can feel his presence, proud of me for being strong enough to do the right thing, even when it meant losing my sons forever.
The foundation I established with the life insurance money has become something bigger than I ever imagined. The Frank Williams Foundation for Victims of Family Crimes now helps dozens of families every year who have gone through tragedy similar to mine. We have psychologists, lawyers, and private investigators all working so that no other family has to suffer in silence what I suffered. 6 months ago, a 40-year-old woman came to see me. Her name was Jennifer, and she suspected her brother had murdered her mother for the inheritance. Her story was painfully similar to mine. Greedy relatives, pressure to sell properties, strange behavior after the death. The foundation provided her with a private investigator, free legal advice, and psychological support throughout the process. When her brother was convicted of murder 3 months later, Jennifer came to hug me crying. "Mrs. Williams, you saved my life. If you hadn't had the courage to report your own sons, I never would have had the courage to report mine." Those are the moments that remind me
Why all the pain I went through was worth it. My story ended up being bigger than my personal tragedy. It has become a symbol that justice is possible, even when it comes from the most unexpected sources. A 66-year-old widow proved that truth is more powerful than lies, that true love is stronger than betrayal, and that it is never too late to do the right thing. Frank, wherever you are, I hope you know that I kept the promise I made to you by your grave that terrible day. I found the truth. I sought justice, and I turned our pain into hope for others. Your death was not in vain, my love. The end.